I'm Reverend Sandra Campbell, Associate Minister here at Unity Temple on the Plaza, and I'm excited about our Courageous Conversations initiative that we started 2 years ago here. We wanted to raise awareness and consciousness on issues that face our society. We often pray and meditate, and we go home, and something else comes up and we pray and meditate again. We wanted to do something more, and so several of us got together and decided to have courageous conversations. We decided that in order to have a courageous conversation, we had to get uncomfortable, because in order to make change, you have to be uncomfortable. So we talk about things that can be very uncomfortable. We talk about the isms, we talk about racism, homophobia, misogyny. We talk about some of everything, and we talk from our own personal perspectives. We listen to each other's ideas, we share, we're empathetic, we have compassion. We don't get upset, we don't get angry, because we each come from different backgrounds and experiences. But after listening empathically, we walk away with a broader sense of what the real world is like and what is our role in making this world one that works for everybody, no matter what we look like or where we come from, that this should be, as Dr. Sharif Abdullah said, a world that works for all. In fact, we used Dr. Sharif Abdullah's work in the very beginning. We used his workbook on creating a world that works for all, and that helped us to get started. And since that time, we've done all kinds of things. We talk about things that affect us daily. We talk about movies and films. We talk about documentaries. We share those with the larger congregation whenever we can. And we're amazed at the kinds of things that have happened as a result. People are starting to open up and talk more about things that often are only talked about around the dinner table, sometimes not in mixed company. And we start to share exactly what the things we've learned that are really not productive. And we start to open our own minds and hearts to how we can be the change we want to see in the world.
Courageous Conversations is exactly what the name implies. It is an opportunity to be courageous in your listening and your sharing. It is an opportunity to share your truth, your feelings, your life, your purpose.
Courageous conversation starts with knowing that you can trust the people that you're with, that they're going to be listening as you will listen with them. You try to speak impeccably. You don't take anything personally.
Well, being a part of the Courageous Conversations group has given me the opportunity to learn about more social justice issues that I may not have been aware of before. One thing for sure that stood out for me is learning about the DREAM Act. And we showed a video on that one Sunday, and we're able to have some of the Dreamers speak to our congregation. Also just being able to be a part of a community where we do have a safe space to have those uncomfortable conversations.
Coming to the group have really opened my eyes to a lot of different factors about life here in Kansas City and around the world. It's helped me to be inclusive and to be open to talking to other races and sexualities about my thoughts and opinions, and just knowing that there's a safe space where you can come in and share how you feel about what's happening right now. And I've also been able to teach my boys, my 3 boys, about what's happening, how to handle themselves, the facts that I take from here. I'm able to share that with them as well.
Courageous Conversations has changed me personally on how to use my voice, how important it is for me to speak and use my voice and express my upbringing, my background, my culture, and learning about others and all the different personalities and different ethnicities and cultures that are in the group, learning about their stories and sharing mine and how important that is.
The conversations that make me most uncomfortable are the conversations that I have with my white friends about racism. And the reason that I'm uncomfortable is because I'm not sure I'm going to have all the answers for the questions they have. So I still have a lot to learn about it myself.
Some of the conversations that have been uncomfortable while being a part of Courageous Conversations have included white privilege, homosexual issues, and there's been others. But it just really gives me the awareness of how much I still have to learn and how those inside of my group and outside experience those things in different ways.
I've learned how to listen and how to share my thoughts. And I've taken that to Piper High School in Kansas City, Kansas, taught some of a student group as they started their Black History program, and I've used that to inspire them to help other students listen and learn.
A great thing that Courageous Conversations has brought about is the open dialogue that we have when we share our book studies or the movies that we share, like The 13th or White Like Me, or some of the clips from the John Gray Meet Me at the Bridge, and that loving community coming together, an example. And we have open dialogue after those moments with the movies and the books that help us have questions and answers and share our thoughts and thinking.
I am greatly inspired by a quote from a 20th century philosopher named Jiddu Krishnamurti that goes, "It is no measure of health to be well-adjusted in a profoundly sick society." And so for me, Courageous Conversations is an absolute gift and blessing, because we have what is now a half millennia more of genocide, oppression, injustice, inequality that this country still operates on. So when we gather and we have these depths of conversation and everyone's willing to share, it is for me shifting the consciousness, which is what we have to do to have some reconciliation with what our history is and who we are as a people and how we show up every day.
You've just heard from some of the members of the Unity Temple Courageous Conversations Initiative here in Kansas City, and all of us have a different perspective and different things to share. We'd like to invite you to start your own conversations. We want to create a ripple effect throughout Unity, throughout our nation, and throughout our world, because only when we engage in face-to-face conversations about issues that are uncomfortable can we change the world. In order to make real change, you have to be willing to get uncomfortable. And that's what Courageous Conversations is all about. If you're not one of those who can deal with being uncomfortable, this kind of conversation might not be for you. But I guarantee if you stretch yourself, if you allow yourself to listen to what others have to say, to be present in the moment, you will help change the world, one courageous conversation at a time. So we're about to have a courageous conversation. And first of all, I'd like for all the members of our Courageous Conversation Initiative to please stand. If you're here today, you'll stand up. And let's give them... Thank you. They have been pushing for me to come out. We're coming out of the manse. It's like coming out of the closet, but we're coming out of the manse and into the living room here, where living actually takes place. But before I get started, we have some candidates for the ministry who just completed admissions this week. One of them is our own David Adams, who successfully completed, now is on the ministry path. And we have several, I'd like for you to stand, who are visiting, who are on the admissions to ministry path right now. Thank you for being here. A woman invited her senior minister over for dinner and his wife. And she was busy trying to get the ketchup out of the bottle they were going to have burgers on the grill. And she was, you know how it is, the S-L-O-W. You may not remember that. If you're as old as me, you do. That was the Heinz ketchup commercial, because it's made with such wonderful ingredients that it takes a long time to get it out of the bottle. So she's there and the phone rings, and of course she tells her little 4-year-old, honey, can you answer the phone? And her little girl answers the phone and she says, it's the preacher. She says, well, tell him I'm busy, I'll call him back. She says she's busy, she's hitting the bottle. Isn't it amazing how in a simple conversation some words can mean something totally different? And that minister may have rushed right over to make sure that everything was okay.
So a lot of times we get into trouble because of conversations where we say one thing, but it doesn't exactly sound like what we intended, or we wish we could suck it back in, right? Have you ever said something and then think about it and go, wow, I wish I hadn't said that? And sometimes it's with our own family members, am I correct? Because we don't all agree on everything. And that's why the world is so great. We don't have to agree on everything. But there are some very touchy subjects going on all the time. And the one thing we have to be careful of in unity is to not polarize our members. So we don't assume that anybody is on either side or the other. So that's why we don't usually talk politics and some of those things that really, affect us and make people feel uncomfortable. But there comes a time when we know we have to be willing to get uncomfortable in order to make change. Because if you're not willing to get uncomfortable, you're probably just going to modify what already exists. I like the analogy of the toilet seat, and you've heard me say this before. Everybody probably uses one, hopefully, in this room, or has seen one before. And so someone asked an audience of people, if you had to change your toilet seat, what would you do? And this person said, I'd make it pink. I like pink, I'd change the color. And back in the day, we had, our whole bathrooms were pink and turquoise and all kinds of colors. And then someone else said, well, I'd make it raise and lower, because, for people who have to adjust it to their height. Great idea. And someone else said, well, I would make it warm, especially in the wintertime. How many have ever walked that path? Yeah. Make it warm. And if you grew up where my mother did in rural Arkansas with a double-seater outhouse, there was no hope for making it warm in the wintertime. So you pray for the day when you can have a warm. Somebody else would say, I want it soft, cushiony. When I sit down, I want to feel comfortable, like I'm sitting on a pillow. And you can buy those toilet seats that are cushiony. Sometimes when they get old, I remember we had one as a child, they crack all up, kind of hurt when you sit down, so. And someone else said, well, I want one that cleans itself. And today we have those. I want one that flushes itself. And we have those too, right? But none of those things actually changed the function of the toilets, right? They just made them more comfortable. So in order to create real change, we have to be willing to get uncomfortable. Right before my talk, after the Bible class this morning, Steve Sanders handed me something, or he told me he had given me something I'd forgotten about, and I went up to my desk and got it. And it's just perfect. Tired of hitting a brick wall. I'm just going to read a portion of it. Have you noticed these terms being used a lot these days? Daily we hear how the world is becoming more and more polarized, or that we are so divided. Maybe, like us, you've noticed yourself saying such things. Can you think of at least one person in your family, at work, at school, who you find yourself in strong opposition to? Or maybe a particular group of people. Maybe you've even cut them out of your life because of a conversation that was uncomfortable. Have you been in a conversation lately where a point of view about an issue, a topic, or an idea is being discussed, and you just can't stand it, and you have to get up and leave? Then you need courageous conversations. We have some very interesting conversations in that group, and we don't always agree, but we listen, as you heard some of the members say. And by listening, we learn some things about ourselves. Sometimes we learn that we're not very good listeners, that we really don't hear what the other person is trying to say. We're not listening from the heart. And that gets in the way of communication and understanding. So I have to think, when I think about this, I think about the late, great departed Aretha Franklin. When she said, R-E-S-P-E-C-T, find out what it means to me. R-E-S-P-E-C-T. That's what is a courageous conversation. That's at the foundation of a courageous conversation, is find out what respect means to me. How do I wish to be treated? We learn the golden rule from an early age. Treat people the way you want to be treated. No, treat people, find out the way they want to be treated, and treat them with respect. And that takes time, and it takes listening. So I'm dedicating this service to some folks who just recently made their transitions, whom you all know, and one you may not know. Aretha Franklin, I mentioned earlier, did a lot of good work and courageous conversations through her music, and her work throughout the civil rights movement. She funded a lot of the civil rights movement through her concerts. She stood side by side with Dr. King and others. She was a courageous woman. Johnny Coleman, you may have heard that name. She was one of the first African Americans to become a unity minister. I stand in her footsteps. This past week was Johnny Coleman Week, and 50 of her congregants from Chicago came. And on Friday, we celebrated an annual Johnny Coleman Day. Well, it wasn't always pretty, because Johnny wasn't as welcomed to unity as many of the other students. And in fact, her classmates in the 50s decided to walk out if they were not going to allow Johnny to stay on the campus, eat in the inn, the vegetarian restaurant, swim in the swimming pool, like the rest of her students. Johnny Coleman became what you might say is the Jackie Robinson of the unity movement. It's not that these things weren't already going on, but she had the courage to stand up and say, I will be treated with respect. She had to live with families in the inner city who she didn't know. She wasn't from Kansas City, and make her way out to Unity Village. And when she was late, of course, she'd get chastised for being late for class. It was sort of like Hidden Figures, if you've seen that movie. But that didn't stop Johnny from following this dream to follow in the footsteps of Charles and Myrtle Fillmore to create a world that works better than the world in which she was born into. And she created a legacy that's far outlived her. And she's been gone about maybe 4 years. She was 92 when she made her transition. One of the largest congregations in the United States, run by a woman. I think she had 4,000 at one time in her congregation, and many of her ministers were people you might recognize, like Della Reese and Les Brown, the speaker, well-known motivational speaker. As a matter of fact, last week, during the Fillmore Festival, I had a chance to meet Della Reese's protege, Sherry James. And Sherry James talked about how your yes can mean the transformation for someone else. Had Johnny Coleman not had the courage to persevere, to follow this dream to become a unity minister, her no might have ended my transformation into the ministry. That's a courageous conversation that we don't talk about. Those are things you don't talk about. You know, that's dirty laundry. We don't air that in front of everybody, right? But how do you get to truth if you never open up and have these conversations? That's important. The Country Club Plaza was once a place where people like me could not come. When I was growing up in the 50s and 60s, this was a forbidden territory, the Country Club Plaza. Not a lot has changed. We need to know our history, and we need to have those courageous conversations and stand up for truth. John McCain is another one I want to recognize for his courage and his integrity. He stood up for the truth. I'll never forget during his campaign when a woman said to him, I don't like that Barack Obama. He's a Muslim. He's not one of us. He said, no, ma'am, that's not true. He's a fine, upstanding man. He's a father. And the only thing is we just differ on our opinions. We're opponents in this race, but he's a good man. And he's not a Muslim. Now, that was a courageous conversation considering these are people he wanted to vote for him. And a lot of times, we don't say the truth because we're afraid that we might lose a friend. We might hurt someone's feelings. There's a way to speak truth to power without ostracizing people. And I hope you're getting that from me today. This is not a political statement. This is a life statement. It doesn't matter what side you sit on. It doesn't matter, because this is about love. It's just like David saying, all I know is love will save the day. That's why we have that beautiful window up there, designed for the very purpose so that while you're looking here, you're focusing on what we're all about, and that's love. And when you love yourself, as Jesus said, and love your neighbor as yourself, everything you do will be done in the consciousness of that love, and they will hear your heart speak, even when your words differ from their ideologies. So our group started as a wake-up call, because several people said that they would come here and feel like they weren't a part of it. They love the message and they love the music, but then they'd feel like they weren't really included. Someone said, diversity is being invited to the table, or invited to the party rather, and inclusivity is being asked to dance. So on behalf of my members in the Courageous Conversations group, this is a call to the dance floor. Today's lesson is a call to stop sitting in your seats, praying and meditating and hoping all this stuff will end eventually, and we'll just be back to business as usual. Because business as usual ain't working. When you see something, do something. When you pray, as the African proverb goes, move your feet. So this is a call to all of you. Now, we'll probably have to change our meeting space from the man's living room to the larger audience, larger space like here. But I doubt there's a member of the Courageous Conversations group that's not ready to welcome you to the conversation, to invite you to dance with us. Because the only way to create change is not only to be uncomfortable, but to start from yourself. Duke's prayer, on this day, I dedicate myself to peace on earth. I can't dedicate you to peace on earth. I dedicate myself to peace on earth. And how do I do that? Unity's principles. Understanding that there is only one presence and one power active in my life, and that is God the good. Seeing the good everywhere present in everyone and everything, no matter how bad it might seem, there's good in it. If I can learn from the experience, even though the experience might not feel good, it's a good experience. If I can learn something from talking to you, even though our views differ, it's a good experience. Because you and I may go home and think about what we just shared, and it may cause us to shift paradigms. We may become more loving and more caring because we opened up and we got the courage to speak the truth that we know. Unity's fifth principle is live the truth you know. You cannot live anyone else's truth. It's your truth. And that's the most important one. And of course, the second principle, we are all inherently good. No matter how we do or show up, we are inherently good. It's our birthright to be good. We connect with that source, the Spirit of God, through prayer and meditation is another principle. And we experience our own reality through our thoughts, words, and actions, the fourth principle. So if we live by those principles, those very simple principles set forth by the Fillmores, it won't be trouble to have a courageous conversation because we're coming from a place of love, and unconditional love. No matter what you look like, where you come from, unconditional love. Today is Women's Equality Day. 98 years ago, my mother was born this month, 98 years ago, the law was signed giving women the right to vote. But before that, several women, a whole entourage of women, had to have courageous conversations. They faced all kinds of persecution at home and everywhere else in society because they were trying to push against the grain. They were trying to create equality and inclusivity in a society that didn't think women should be equal to men. Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Lucretia Mott, Susan B. Anthony, and let's not forget Sojourner Truth, who as a former slave stood before an entourage, a cabinet of white males, took off her blouse and said, "Ain't I a woman? Ain't I a woman?" Talk about courageous. I wouldn't do that. But she made her point. We've had people in history who've done all kinds of things showing courage for their convictions, and because of them, we stand on the shoulders of giants. We're the beneficiaries of so many people who had the courage to start the conversation. I'll never forget when Ace Wagner came to our meeting, and he shared with us about the anatomy of peace. You remember that, Ace? And that's about courageous conversations. It's about having the courage to stand for something that you're not necessarily familiar with, but you know it needs to be done. It's not affecting you, it's not in your backyard, but it needs your voice. Many of the things we talk about in courageous conversations don't affect us daily. The homelessness, the crime, the poverty. We may not have that experience personally, but if it's happening to someone, it might as well be happening to us. Jesus said, what you do for the least of them, you do for me, and what you do to the least of them, you do to me. Courageous Conversations calls us to speak up, to stand up for what we know is right. Now that speaking up and standing up may appear differently to different people. You may not want to join a march or walk from Olathe to Topeka like Beth Da Silva did. You may not want to join a bike-a-thon or stand out with a sign. There may be other things that you can do, speaking truth to power at your own dinner table. When you're out with relatives and you hear a disparaging remark about someone and you know that's not true, it may give you the courage to speak up. Muhammad Ali said these words. When we think about, sometimes we say, you know, it's impossible to change the world. Who am I to think that I can make that big of a difference? I'm just little old me. And I put this on your bulletin. He says, impossible is just a word thrown around by small people who find it easier to live in the world they've been given than to explore the power they have to change it. Impossible is not a fact. It is an opinion. Impossible is potential. And you know, we say, well, we're a small group. There are not that many of us. We sit together, we talk, we do a lot of exchange of information. We're trying to come up with ways that we can make a bigger splash, that we can create a ripple effect throughout this congregation, throughout the community, outside, throughout unity, to be the change that we want to be, that we want to see in the world, as as Mahatma Gandhi said. And Margaret Mead said this about small groups and how powerful we can be. She said, never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has. So if you don't think you're enough to make a change, if you don't think you're enough to have a courageous conversation, think again. It could be you with one person, and you may be the very one to change their mind. Did you read about the young man recently who decided to pass himself off as a member of the Klan and got friendly with, I think this was a skinhead group, and got friendly with the man who started the group? He ended up becoming his daughter's godfather. The black guy becomes the daughter's godfather, the daughter of the skinhead, right? And invited to the wedding. And he's one of the biggest people in this hate organization. He won't give him his robe, but this man is going around collecting, as he gets people to, he has these courageous conversations and gets them to switch from being in these hate groups, he asks them for their robe. He has been bringing their robes to the African American History Museum in Washington, D.C. Now that's a courageous conversation because they risk their lives when they change from a group that has so much power and control. And that was a courageous conversation for the black guy to even think he could infiltrate that kind of a hate group. It takes courage to make change, and change can be uncomfortable. So when we sing, "Let there be peace on earth and let it begin with me," as we close this service, remember, that's not always comfortable. We like status quo. Who in here doesn't like things just stay just the way they are? It's comfortable, not too hot, not too cold, you know, just the way it is. Eleanor Roosevelt said, "It isn't enough to talk about peace, one must believe it. And it isn't enough to believe it, one must work at it." And you can do that this very day. I'm sure you're going to have a conversation with somebody, and it's going to push a little button or remind you of your responsibility. In order to be the change we want to see in the world, we have to be willing to be uncomfortable and engage in it, one conversation at a time. That is your challenge for this week. Let's see if you can do it. Let's focus on that as we move into the silence.